Hey everybody, you're watching Cadroll Hunter, and I bought a huge coin collection, and there are tons of old nickels that we're going to look at in today's video, including some real oldies featuring King George V. Stay tuned. Hey everybody, this is James and you're watching my channel Cadroll Hunter, and I bought a huge collection of coins and I have been chronicling that collection with you on the channel. Today we're going to look at the nickels. There are a whole ton of nickels that have already been flipped up and put in this binder here, and starting with the 1920s with King George V, it continues on to the 30s. And then King George VI. We got tons of oldies. It looks like a lot of the King George V and VI are already in these binders in this flip. But there's a bunch of loose stuff here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take stock at what we got, how many of these old nickels, and then we're particularly going to look to see if we have any in better condition or perhaps even some of the varieties or key dates. So the very first thing I'm going to do is get everything out of here and see what we've got in terms of years. They go right into the 50s here, and then we'll start to stack them up. And man, I'm so excited. There's just tons of old stuff here that I don't get to see very often. All right, I have liberated them from the binder. It didn't really take much. I just turned it upside down and then shook it a bit, and everything just fell out. But look at this. We got King George V. That is a 1936. There is a really nice looking war nickel. That is chromium plated steel. We got Queen Elizabeth. We got lots of George VI. I'm going to stack these up by year before we dig into this pot over here. There's some that are in some plastic here. There's another George V. So really curious to see what we've got, and do we have any varieties? So I've taken everything out of their flips for the moment, and we got tons of old stuff all the way back to first year 1922. So this is the year that the nickel composed 5-cent pieces, or nickels as we now call them, were introduced. Prior to this, they were in silver. 1921 was the last year of silver. Now, most of that mintage was melted down, so that is an extremely rare Canadian coin. But from 1920 and earlier, you could find 5-cent pieces in silver, and they were so small they were called fish scales. These are much heftier, and here is a first year King George V nickel composed nickel, as we like to call them now. We got 22, 23. We've skipped the key dates. 25 is the key date. 26 is a really hard date to get, particularly the far 6 variety. And we've got 28 and 29. And then when we get into 30s, we don't have the 30, but we have the 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36. But check this out. Once we get into the King George VI, we got a stack of 1937s. 38 is a lower mintage year. That's a harder one to get. And we got a whole bunch of them. And then 1939, I stacked them up until they fell over, and I had to pick them back up and put them into 2 piles here because we got tons of them. At first glance, I'd say that's probably 23, 24 or so. Well, it's an odd number, obviously, because I've got 1 nickel on the top, but that's lots. And then we get into the 40s. We've got a 40. There's a 42. This one's got some rust and gunk on it. And this is a transition year. They made the nickel with the beaver here in 1942, both in nickel and in tombac, which is a bronze alloy with some copper in it. And we don't have any of those, and I didn't see any in the box here, so that's kind of curious because those would really stand out. They're just a different color than all of these. We don't have a 43 and we don't have a 44 in here, but we have a couple of these 45s. And these 45s here, these are victory nickels. They have Morse code around the edge that says, "We win when we work willingly." But this was because nickel was a metal that was required for the war effort. So these are chromium plated steel, and they were that way in 44, 45, and we returned a nickel in 46. We've got the beaver here on all of these into 49. We got a whole stack of 50s, no 51s in here. 52, 53, 54. Those are all war nickels as well. They are steel with chromium plating, and this was because of the requirements of the Korean War. So we had another war and we needed more precious metals for the war effort. Then we've got 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, and then a couple of 1967s. So astoundingly, some of the oldest ones, these early 30s, are the ones we have in huge quantities. But if I think about it, a lot of these coins here were collected by Edgar. This is Tristan's father. Tristan contacted me to see if I would be interested in purchasing his father's collection. So Edgar was putting these in a jar as he got them. Anything that stood out as either older or as special, so commemoratives, things like that. And he was doing this for decades. So in the early years, perhaps these weren't even available, he was doing it with these ones here when he found them. And as the years passed, the ones in the 60s and 50s ended up being the older ones. So that's just the way people collect. The new stuff isn't all that interesting until it becomes old one day. I'm going to get into this cigar box here, if I can open it up here, and I'm going to start to organize these guys. There's some interesting ones in plastic, and we'll see what we've got, because I see a lot of Queen Elizabeth in here, but there are still some older ones in here. So we'll fill up the board. Then we're going to look to see if we've got any of those varieties. So this is pretty interesting. There are a bunch here that are protected in these little plastic sleeves. And I think that these plastic sleeves might have been from candies or something like that have been stapled up on the ends. So Edgar probably found these, and this is what was handy to kind of protect some of the older stuff, because this is a 34. We've got a 39, a 37. There's another 39. There's a 1928. And then a commemorative from 1951. So I think whatever he had handy, he wasn't buying numismatic supplies, like 2x2 flips in the early years. So he just used what he had. He recognized that these were old and special. So that's pretty awesome. So we're about halfway through this box. I can still see a bunch of King George VI in here. What we've been pulling out has definitely been skewed towards the 60s. That's what's here. 60, 61, 62, 63. 64 is the most prevalent here. 65, 6, 7, and even a 68. The 64s are very common, but it's exciting because there is a very interesting variety, the extra waterline. So we'll come to that. We've just got more to check, but we've got lots of stuff. But I have been filling in more of the 40s and 50s. There's some 1944 Victory we hadn't had before, so that's pretty exciting too. I'm going to get to the rest of these guys here, though, and see what else we got. Just getting down to it at the bottom of the cigar box, but we found another King George V that was a 1930. It's one that we didn't already have, so that's pretty cool. Finally got everything out of that cigar box here and lined up from the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and then a ton from the 60s. There were tons and tons from the 60s. Before we look at any of the varieties and what we got here, there were some bags here of, it looks like maybe more modern nickels. I'll get these out and we'll see what these are and why these were set aside. So this is pretty interesting. I've stacked up the coins that were in those baggies, and I think I've learned something about Edgar as a collector. In my conversations with Tristan, he suggested that Edgar was perhaps more of a not a hoarder of coins, but any older coins that he found or obvious commemoratives, things that were different, he just threw into a jar. And I got the sense that maybe he wasn't particularly knowledgeable necessarily in errors or varieties or would be scoping coins or anything like that. But what I see here suggests to me that he knew more about coins than just the average person. And that's because he has kept aside some that would appear the same as others of that era, but are different in some respects. So first of all, he kept aside the 1970s. There's a bunch of them here. And 1970 is a key date in the modern Canadian coins. It's a lower mintage coin. There was a strike at the mint. The facility couldn't meet the demand of coins because they'd halted production for some time. So they have some additional value because they are harder to get. Next up here is the 1977. You'll see I've got two stacks of them. And while at first glance, the 1977 looks the same as every other nickel, there are a couple of varieties. There's a high 7 and a low 7. I'll just show you what these look like. They're both fairly common. You can see I've got one more of the low 7 than the high 7, but generally speaking, it's about 50-50 out there. But for a collector, you'd probably want to get them both. I'll throw them up here so you can see that. Here's one of the 77s. This one's the high 7. Really, we're looking at this 7 here with relation to the second one here, or the first one, I suppose. This is just a little bit higher than the first 7. I'm going to pull up another one here, and you'll see that this one is just a little bit different. The 7 actually sits just a little bit lower, so it's the high 7 and the low 7. Now, if you're just looking at the 1977, they both look the same. Like, the average person can't discern the difference. It's a 1977. I mean, you can see it with the naked eye, but people really aren't paying that much attention to coins, except if you know what you're looking for. So Edgar, I think, was informed about the 1977s and knew there were a couple of varieties, and that was interesting to him, and he kept them. So that's pretty cool. The same thing with the 1991. There's a short stack of them here, but 1991 is also another year that is particularly low mintage, and these 1991s look really, really nice. So he set those aside as well. The average person really would not have known. Now, this next big stack here, the 1992s, these are commemoratives. That's 125 years of Confederation with the double dates, 1867 to 1992. So that one was clearly a commemorative. But when we get over here, we've got the 2000s, and this is a bunch of 2000 Ps. If you watch my channel, you know I hold on to all my 2000 Ps. It's just another lower mintage year. So obviously Edgar knew that and held on to them. And then the 2003s at first glance, you know, I've got two stacks of them here. The 2003 doesn't look like anything special, but I'll throw these ones under the scope and we'll see what the difference is. So on the reverse, these are exactly the same, but this is a transition year. We went from this older portrait of Queen Elizabeth, or I should say younger portrait of Queen Elizabeth that is on the older coins, to this updated one that was used right up until the Queen's death. And so obviously Edgar was aware that this was a different variety, that it was a transition, and oftentimes transition years, one or the other of these varieties might be lower mintage. It just happens that in the 2003 year, there isn't anything specifically rare about either of them, but he was setting aside coins that he knew were different or special for some reason. And then the very last ones here, we have a whole bunch of these 2017s that these are obviously commemoratives, and I'll hold on to any of these that are in exceptional condition for sure. Next up, I think we want to take stock of where we are with these varieties that we might find. Now, typically when I'm looking at varieties of Canadian coins, I have my Charlton catalog here with me. It's a handy reference guide. One thing to note is that it really only lists some of the major varieties, but there is a resource that I want to share with you, and that is the Hans Zoll catalog, variety catalog of Canadian coins. He cataloged minor die varieties in all the denominations. This is published in 1960, and so it's only going to be some of the older ones, but it's reprinted in the Charlton catalogs. This is the 2023 catalog, and they've reprinted the varieties in the pennies and nickels. So if I can flip the pages here, and they actually catalog a bunch of the different kinds of errors that you can find in coins. But look at all of the information. There are a bunch of different minor varieties that he painstakingly cataloged, photographed, put little arrows and diagrams on them, gave them names. It's really fantastic. So I'm going to be looking in here for any of the minor varieties as well. I don't always do that. Interestingly, in the 2023 edition, it's the pennies and the nickels. The more current 2024-25 edition has the dimes. So if you didn't know that, don't get rid of your old catalog if you have it, because this information isn't in the updated version. So we're going to start, I think, in the early dates. We'll look at the King George V. There are some varieties we want to be aware of. We were fortunate enough to get 3 1922s, and I've put them all up on the screen here. Some of the years in the King George V have what are known as the near S and far S. And it's just talking about the gap between the S and the rim here. And they're pretty slight differences. So, and there isn't a variety of this that is actually significantly more expensive or more valuable than another one. But this one in the middle is probably considered the near S. It's very close to the rim. This one might be the far S. It's further, might be twice as far away, I guess. But most collectors aren't looking quite that closely. But if you have multiples and you can see the difference and know that you've got both varieties, that's pretty cool. That variety exists. I'll just pull this up here on the 1922, the 1929, the 1932, the 1934, the 1936. So I'll check all of those, but you'll want to see if you've got more than one, compare them, see if they're the same or different, to know if you've got more than one of those varieties. Now, we didn't get the 1925, that's the key date, and we didn't get the 26. It's also a key date. It's a higher mintage than the 25, but it's under $1 million. There's a variety in there, and that's the near 6 and far 6, and that's how close the 6 on that coin would be to the maple leaf. We didn't get any to check here. That's unfortunate, but we do have some others. We've got the 28 and 29, and in the 29, there is the near and the, we'll move the 28 scene over here, I guess. But in the 29, there's that near S and far S. One we want to check for sure is in the 1932. There is a near 2 and a far 2 we want to have a look at. So we only got one 1932, and here it is, and it's in pretty terrible shape. You can see it's got some dents and scratches and bumps and bruises. It's pretty damaged. It's got some pretty significant rim damage, so I don't know what happened there. But you don't want to overlook this one. Even in a VG8, if you find a far 2, it's worth about $300, as opposed to maybe $1 in that same condition for the near 2. And what we're looking at is how close is the 2 to the leaf. And this is the near 2. It's close to the leaf. The 2 is actually far away from the 3. If we found the far 2, it would be nudged closer to this 3. There's less of a gap here, and that's the valuable one. You'll always want to look for that. Another little trick to do is to draw a line from the tip of this leaf to the tip of this leaf. And if that line touches the 2, it's the near 2. If it's the far 2, the valuable one, the 2 is a little bit lower and further away, and it won't touch that line. Here's a 1937, and you'll see that there's a dot there after that 7. And I've talked in recent videos about some coins that are actually quite valuable with a dot, particularly the 1936s that have dots. There's no 1936 dot nickel, just so you know. But the 1937 dot isn't like those other ones where that dot either signified something, like it was minted in a different year. This dot here actually signifies nothing whatsoever. It was actually only included because the engraver, the artist who was designing the coin, felt that because this 7 was sweeping off to the side, it needed something here to, air quotes, balance the design. So it really doesn't mean anything. It doesn't signify anything different about the minting process. It doesn't signify anything about the date that it was minted. anything at all. It was purely a design consideration for the aesthetic of the coin. Very odd. Now, there's no variety on the 1938 to look at, but I just want to point this one out because it is the third lowest mintage of all of the King George VI nickels, behind just the 1948, which we'll come to, and the 1942 Tomback, which we didn't get any of here. So it's really nice to see a big stack. It looks like we've got maybe 7 or 8 of them there, of what I would call a semi-key date, very low mintage, and it's so hard to find nickels in the 30s, and we got tons, including we got a stack, we got 29 1939s, and we got 18 1937s, just crazy. We got 3 1946s, and this is a year that has a couple of recognized varieties in the Charlton catalog, as well as some additional ones that Hans Zoll noted. I put them under the scope, and this very first one is one of the varieties that Hans Zoll recognized or cataloged, and it's what's called the Heavy Loop on 6. Basically, you can see like this extra line on the inside of that 6 that makes it what he called a heavy loop. I'm going to flip this up because this is a cool one. I've found one of these before when I was looking through my own 1946s going through the Hans Zoll catalog, so that's really cool. We can check the other ones here. The other one we're looking for, there's an arrowhead, and that would be a die anomaly in the 6. And I don't see that there. And this one here looks like maybe just a little bit of damage on that 6. There's also a re-engraved 5 cents where you could see where the die was probably wearing down. They re-engraved it. And it kind of looks like doubling across the top of 5 cents, which we don't see on any of these here. But we did get that variety, the heavy loop on the 6. In 1947, there were actually 2 versions of the nickel that were minted, these normal 1947s, and then a version that added a little maple leaf after the 7. These ones were actually minted in 1948, and they were in need of new dies. And the reason they did that was because the coin's obverse said, "and Emperor of India" at end imp, and India had gained its independence. They didn't want to be minting coins with the year 1948. After India's independence in 1947, partway through the year. So they just added the little maple leaf so they could meet the demand for coins. But there's a more rare variety, and it's the 1947 dot. And this dot is just an anomaly that appears just by the base of the 7. It's not the maple leaf. So we've got a few to check here just to see if we've got anything other than the 2 normal ones. There's a normal 47. Normal 47. That's a maple leaf. And that is also a maple leaf, and this one's probably going to be 2. There we go. So I'm really happy we got 4 1948s, and this is the key date in King George VI nickels. It's minted at just 1.81 million in a VF20. It's worth about $2. So that's not a lot for what we would call a key date, but it's significantly lower mintage than any of the other years, and other coins in that grade might just be 50 cents. These might not quite be there. These are all pretty rough looking, but there is a variety in the Hans Zoll catalog. It's not one that I was familiar with. Streamers behind neck. It's 175B, and if we look up here, we can see it's basically some little die anomalies behind his head. And lo and behold, I took one of these coins and put it under the magnification, and look what we see. Some little die anomalies behind his head, exactly as pictured in the Hans Zoll catalog. You can see there's 2 at the bottom by the arrow, and there's at least 1 up above. And that's what we've got. Really cool. So this is another one. I'm going to flip this one up, and I'm going to call this, it's the streamers behind neck. That's pretty awesome. So if you don't know what to look for, if you don't have a guide like this, you would just miss out on something that another collector has already noted. So that's just really, really cool. Well, this is pretty cool. I'm looking through the 1950s here, and there's another variety cataloged by Hans Zoll, and it's called the hearing aid. And this is it right here. It's basically a line here as though we had a hearing aid with some kind of a wire or something. It's also characterized by these marks behind his head. It's cataloged there. We found one. Again, this is in pretty rough shape. It's got some scratches, but this is very definitely Hans Zoll's hearing aid, which he cataloged as 177H in the 1950 King George VI. So there were two nickels issued in 1951. One of them is quite properly a nickel. It's in fact commemorating mining of nickel in Sudbury, Ontario here. 200 years of mining nickel. That's this one here. And it has a variety we want to look for. And then there's the 1951 with the beaver. This one's actually chromium plated steel. And there is a very rare and valuable variety we want to look for here. We'll start with the commemorative and then we'll look at this one here. So on the nickel commemorative, we're looking for a dye anomaly here below the 1. It's called the half moon, and Hans Zoll cataloged a large variety and a small variety. I have found one before. We don't see it on that one. We don't see it there either. It would be quite obvious if we saw one. Not there. We have one more to look at. And we don't have it on any of those. The chrome-plated steel one, what we're looking for here is a very expensive high relief 1951. It would be very difficult to tell the difference between the high relief and the low relief strike of these coins, but there is one difference we can look at, and that is that the A on the low relief points between these two rim denticles. The high relief is going to point right to identical. I've never found one. In an F12, it's listed in the Charlton catalog as $650. So if we found it, it would be incredible. And the only way we're going to know is just to check them all. I'm expecting they're all going to be this common low relief, but you just never know until you look. I really don't know how rare it actually is. Of course, I've never found one, and they're quite valuable. So one would have to assume that the number of these that have been found is pretty low, but it's always possible that there is one out there, and wouldn't you want to be the guy or a gal who found it? It's not going to be me today. In the 1953, there are two pretty common obverses. There's the no shoulder fold and the shoulder fold. It's referring to the queen here and whether or not there is a strap or a fold in the design. Hard to tell on a circulated coin. This is the no shoulder fold. This one here that has this flared eye. And if we look, we don't really see a line here, so that's it. They're both common, but they were paired up with a particular reverse die, and it was found that there were some that were a very uncommon pairing. So what we're looking at on the reverse is how close or how far this maple leaf is to the rim. This is the far. So this is a no shoulder fold far, and that's the common one. If we found this maple leaf on the no shoulder fold almost touching the rim, that would be the rare one. So we've got 4 to check. We may as well do that. This is no shoulder fold. That's also far. This one here this is shoulder fold. So what we're looking for here is we want it to be far, but in fact, this one is near. So that's the common one. It's hard to keep track of all these things. That's why it's helpful to have the guide handy, because there are diagrams here. This one here is also the no shoulder fold, but it's also far. So we got the common varieties here, but that's okay because it's awesome getting a bunch of 50s nickels for my collection. Here's a 1954. This is the shoulder fold, and all of the 54s should be the shoulder fold, but there were a handful of no shoulder folds discovered. We only got a few of them here, and we're going to check and see if we got one. We did not. Again, I'm looking at that eye to see if it's flared, and it's not. So that's just the common one. Here's one of the 5 1957s we got. What we're looking for on this one is what's known as the bug tail. It's basically just a little die chip at the end of the beaver's tail. And we'll check them all and see if we got one. I don't think I have found one in the past. So that would be really cool if we got one. Not there. Not looking like it. We didn't get one. There's a double date variety we can find in the 1958s, probably a re-engraved date on a worn die. You would see what appears to be doubling across this 1958. We got a handful to check here to see if we might have one. Not so far. Nope. Here is a really nice 1960 that was in here, almost uncirculated. There's a variety of the 1960 called the Bear Beaver, where there's no fur on the beaver, it seems. It's just very flat. The challenge when you're dealing with circulated coins is that they all look that way. There's so very little detail in the fur anyhow. So you can see this one here, not a lot, but by the rear haunch there, a little bit. If I take a circulated coin from 1960, it has almost no beaver detail on there, but probably because this is been pretty circulated. So you really need to see one that is almost uncirculated like this one, where it doesn't even have this kind of detail, because anything that's going to be circulated probably looks like a bear beaver. And in case I misspoke, it's really known as the bald beaver. What I'm thinking of probably is the 1990 bear belly beaver, where we have dye deterioration or dye polishing that obscures the fur here. Just to give you an idea though, how little detail there is on this 1960 versus more modern beavers, this one here has way more fur detail, way more detail in total. This is one of those 2003s. So already a 1960 has a lot less detail on it, even in its best state. So here's where we're going to have some things to check. There is a dye deterioration double date in the 1962s. We got a few stacks of them here we'll check, but we got a lot of 1964s, and probably one of the most well-known dye anomalies in the nickel is the 1964 extra water line, and we have lots of chances to check for that. There's a normal 1962. So far, they're all looking just like that. So here's one that might be a candidate for the double date. I can see some doubling at the base of the 2, the base of the 1, and a little bit at the base of the 6. It's a little bit hard to see. It's not coming through well on the phone here. Try to rotate it around, see if you can see it a little bit there. But we can probably find them more significant than that. So to be really considered the double 1962 or double date, we might want to find one that looks a little bit more significant. We'll see. And here's one that's more significant. Just a few coins later, you can see the base of that 1, the base of that 2. Really easy to see there. I can see it at the base of the 9 as well. So that's cool. I'll set that aside and keep looking through. A little further on, here is a third one. You can see that doubling at the base of the 1, at the base of the 6, and the base of the 2. So that's cool. We found a few here. Now, mind you, these are all very circulated coins, so they're not particularly valuable. But if you're looking for these dye varieties, then it's pretty neat, and you'll want to scope them to find them. The Charlton catalog shows this in an AU50 as being an $8 coin. So in this condition, significantly less than that. But it's still interesting. What makes the hobby interesting is finding these kinds of interesting little varieties. Now, the next one we want to look for is the 1964 extra waterline. This one is very well known and highly sought after, and is even valuable in a circulated condition. It might still be a $15 or $20 coin, so that would be a cool find. And what we're looking for is what appears to be an extra waterline. It's a die crack from the edge of the log to the rim of the coin. That's what we want to find. We got a whole bunch here that we can scope to see. I'll run through them. If I find one, I will bring you right back. So no luck on the extra water line on the 1964s, unfortunately. There is one more variety to look for in the 1965s. We've got a big stack of them, and it's an incredibly rare one. It's the large bead variety. I've never found it. Even in an EF, I think it is like an $800 coin. I've pulled one up under the scope we can take a look at. This is the small bead. And basically, the large bead, we're looking for a large bead right in the middle of the Roman numeral 2 there. We have basically a bead that's a little off to the right and a bead that's above this eye. We want one that is right in the middle. I'm going to scope them all. Like I said, I've never found it. It's exceedingly rare. If I do find one, I'll let you know. So we didn't find the scarce 1965. You know what? Next time. That's what you got to say when you're a coin roll hunter or you're looking through collections. You might not find it this time, but if you're persistent, you're probably going to find something interesting. Maybe not the 1965 large beads, but probably something interesting. And we have. In fact, we had tons of coins to go through. We had 21 King George V nickels. That's just crazy. They're so rare to come by. 9 of them were in the 20s and 12 of them were in the 30s. We had 148 King George VI nickels. We had 55 in the 30s, big stacks in the 30s. That's crazy. 62 in the 40s and 31 in the 50s. And we had 29 Queen Elizabeth II laureate portraits in the 50s, and then a whole bunch of them in the 60s that we were able to look at. And we scoped almost all of these for varieties, and that was lots of fun. And we found some too. We got a few from that Hans Zoll catalog. We got the Heavy Loop 6, 1946. We got the 1948 die variety with the streamers, and the 1950 hearing aid. And I've noted them all here with the Hans Zoll variety number, which is really cool. And a few here that are the 1962 double dates. I always love going through old nickels and finding things that you might not normally find, and particularly looking in great numbers like this. It's so rare to get a huge whack of old nickels to look through, so that made it particularly fun. I hope you enjoyed it too, looking through old nickels for varieties as part of this massive collection. And I really, once again, want to say I really appreciate Tristan and the Morris family for trusting me with this collection, allowing me to look at it and to share it with all of you as well. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. I always appreciate it. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, CAD Roll Hunter, you've watched this far, you want to hit the button and see my upcoming videos. I have new videos coming out all the time. Sometimes it's looking at collections like this. Sometimes it's coin roll hunting, rolls of coins from the bank, and other fun coin-related things. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you again next time. The sponsors of today's video are Lighthouse Canada and the Charlton Press. Lighthouse Canada is the leading supplier of high-quality numismatic supplies in Canada, and the Charlton Press is the leading publisher of coin and paper money catalogs and price guides for Canadian collectors. Go check out their online stores today and use the exclusive discount code CRH20 for 20% off all your purchases.